Sorry, I have to rub off my windscreen.
I'm just going to kick us off then and say, welcome back to the podcast, Joshua Villers.
Joshua.
If this is your first time joining us, I'm John Oliver, joined today by Ian Dunaway.
What's up?
And Joshua Villers. And today we're going to tackle a topic that every ministry leader faces: finding and keeping the best volunteer team.
Yep.
And if you've ever struggled with recruiting the right people, equipping them effectively, or keeping them engaged long term, you're not alone. So today,
well, and if you're not concerned with that, your ministry either isn't healthy, it isn't growing, or you're not going to be in ministry very long. So, so at the end of the day, that's just where you're at.
Yeah, that's true. So what we're going to do today is we're going to break this into two parts. First, we're going to unpack the root of the challenges that we face in building volunteer teams.
Okay.
What's holding us back and why we sometimes find ourselves frustrated. And in the second part, we'll dive into practical solutions and give you guys a preview of some exclusive resources available at the Shaping Student Ministry Network. All right, so let's jump in, guys.
All right. So we got Josh here, and Joshua, you've been not only our good friend for quite a while now, and you've been through cohorts with us and doing all this, but you use our stuff, and man, we're over the moon about that. But you have been doing a lot to invest in your leaders, which we're excited about, and so we loved having you on to talk about this. But outside of that, I think that as we set up how important it is for us to invest in leaders and to do all of that, I think it's important to talk about kind of where ministry, but specifically student ministries come. So I've been doing student ministry for about 18 or 19 years. John, you've been doing it for about 13 years or 15, 16 years, right? I don't know.
We're old guys now.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter how long we've been doing. I say that, and when most people don't care. And the point of saying that is not to be like, oh man, I know everything.
Because I've earned every one of these gray hairs. You should definitely care.
The point is not to tell you that's long enough for us to know a lot of the stuff we don't know. That's long enough for us to tell you we don't know a lot of things. And I think you hit a point where you realize what you do know, but you also, when you can start recognizing what you don't know, that's a great place to be. Mm-hmm. And that's why we try and bring on so many guests and so many people. But here's what I do remember. I've been watching student ministry since I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I watched student ministry from the 90s because my brother and sister were so much older than me. And when we talk about this idea of leaders and of people, I remember student ministry in the 90s. And I remember watching it, and I remember seeing it. And I grew up most of my life in really big churches or mega churches. I served in most of those places, and I've been in all sizes now. But when you talk about volunteers and leaders, that's a mixed bag of what you're asking. But healthy leaders and good teams and good leaders, that's not so mixed. That's a pretty tight spectrum of what you're looking for, right? And so I kind of think we need to kind of reflect on what a good leader looks like, because you could probably ask 10 different student pastors to get 10 different answers, right, Josh?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think that all of those answers that would be given by those pastors are very reasonable and thought out answers. I think that a good leader looks like a plethora of things. There are definitely wrong answers to what it looks like, but there are
I need a leader that can do a lock-in with me. I need to keep them kids out of the bathroom for more than 5 minutes, right?
Are you pro lock-in or anti lock-in?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Am I?
Yeah.
Look, I'm still in my youth, and so I can definitely still do a lock-in.
He's pro lock-in.
Now, but here's no. Wait.
Okay.
I'm getting to the back end of it, where my students have asked me numerous times. So we did a lock-in, I guess, a year and a half ago, and it went fine. But man, if they,
I'm at the age now where if I'm doing it, it's got to be super intentional and very scripted. We did, and I have done multiple all night Star Wars marathons with Battlefront tournaments on one side and the movies on the other. We had, but the best part now for me is I've got leaders that want to do lock-ins with their students, and so they'll quote unquote rent the student facility and work out a whole night of fun. We'll make sure security is close by and all that. That's the best, because it's the kids are getting that experience in a small group setting, and I'm sleeping. So it's great.
Yeah, but listen, I'm not even, this is what's crazy to me too and I think there's I don't know. I'm going to say something that's going to get me in trouble, but I think not in trouble with anybody other than just going to make people mad. But like, I get really tired. I sit across the table at different functions and all that kind of stuff. And I'm never going to say names and things like that, but I sit across the table from guys and like in bigger churches and like mega churches in that world. Like, I recently sat across a guy because I connect with pastors all over the country. So does John, so does Joshua now, because he does cohorts with us and stuff like that. So we're always talking. But I sat across with a guy who was used to be a student guy pretty recently. And like sometimes, like, I don't like lock-ins because I don't think that's really reaching students. Do I think that it reached students in the 90s and in the early 2000s? Yeah, because there weren't that many options to do a lot of things for students because, culture and technology.
Well, kids weren't talking. Yeah, technology, I think, is the huge thing. Kids weren't talking. Now kids talk whenever they want. You just roll over and they text their friend.
They needed options for stuff. And we could create that, and that was a community creating. We don't need that anymore, and we're always so busy that now it's like, it's the rest. Like, even when you talk about planning out camp, you used to need to plan out camp in D-Now to the letter because students needed a lot of activity and focus. But now you need to, in the last 5 to 10 years, you got to build rest. And students, like, you can take their phones. Like, I give my leaders full phone autonomy. Like, I tell my leaders, hey, you control the phones. Once they go to bed, you take phones away and give them to your leader. But leaders can control when the phones come out. And my kids love our student camps because, and I'm both student ministry and teaching pastor at our church. We have a church plant, but like, that's, our students thank us for camp, right? And so, like, things change. But I'm hearing more and more, sometimes when we talk about volunteers, and we spent more time on this probably than we should, but I think it's important to know the quality of your volunteers. Like, when you talk about your events and things like that, I hear a lot of guys go, man, I don't even do, like this one guy said, we're not even doing student camp anymore. And I said, why? And he goes, because student camp is important. I think student camp's important. I think D-Now is important, or like a weekend away or a retreat or something like that's key. He went, well, because of the lawsuits, man. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, because you can't put leaders in any kind of room around kids anymore because they'll sue them. And I said, and I didn't say this because it wasn't the venue, but what I wanted to say was, no, you are a terrible trainer and developer of leaders. And you got crappy leading and you're not doing a good job with your people, because if you recruited well and you developed well, then that wouldn't be a problem. And I can say that with confidence, and all of us can say that with confidence in this podcast, because we've all had 10, 20, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 leaders, and we have personally loved them, cared for them, developed them. And I've run camps, bigger camps than he's had at 400 or 500 kids. And so I have the best overall leader team that I've ever had in all my years of ministry. Yeah. I've got 52 adults that serve with me every week. Yeah. And I know them, I love them, but there's a whole protocol, a training process. There's things that we do together. Like, it's not like the worst thing I think that we can do sometimes is when we can give them little to no responsibility, because low responsibility equals low value. That is 100%, John.
So
100%.
Anyway, I'm gonna turn it back to you guys.
I think when you give like just a small menial task to a volunteer that desperately wants to help and desperately wants to be involved in ministry, it can be taken as, okay, well, you don't trust me to do something else. And that's the last thing that you want to communicate to any kind of volunteer, whether it's in student ministry or anything else, is that you don't trust them. And so definitely, and that is a difficult thing for leaders to do, is to relinquish responsibility and to say, hey, you know what? I can't do everything. I'm not wired that way. Yeah. I need help. And because I need help, and because I want to see the students grow in their faith, I'm going to equip the leaders. I'm going to equip the volunteers so that I don't even have to worry about something falling through the cracks, because doing everything on your side to grow your leaders, to grow your volunteers, to grow the students, and everyone's in the same page, going the same direction. And that relinquishes so much stress off of you.
And that's where we used to be.
I think too that we've got to be sure that we're communicating that there's no such thing as a small task.
Yeah.
Like when we take students on mission trips or when we go on mission trips, my primary goal when we take our students to Boston and we serve with Kings Hill up in Mission Hill, part of Boston community, when we go there or when we go to anywhere, any of the places we go, the primary task for us is to serve the people that are there long term.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's great to be able to interact with locals and to do those things, but like sometimes the greatest impact a mission team can have is by serving the missionary. I would say not sometimes, most of the time. And so Matt Bush was a guy, he and his wife were in Haiti, and we went one time and we just helped them paint their house. Like we had a whole crew that was designated to do nothing but house chores for them, just to help them. And so what I heard you say is like, yeah, sometimes they can get those little menial tasks and they can feel like they're not really contributing or not valued. I think it's on us as leaders that we've got to be able to tell them like, hey, this may seem really small, but this is so huge. Because for me to be able to just turn something over and know that something like this is going to get done, man, that's such a huge deal.
That comes from us. Like that
absolutely comes from us.
If we are asked to do something and we turn our nose up at it and say, I'm the student pastor, like I shouldn't be doing this, then who are we to fault our volunteers for doing the exact same thing?
So let's look at it. So now we've introed all of this, and so let's look at this idea because we've jumped into it. Old ministry model, and I look at like guys like I'm talking about. I'm not even picking on them, but here's the idea. When we say, well, I'm not ever doing this event again, or I'm not doing this idea because, well, it's just too ridiculous. Well, sometimes you need to cancel events or not do things like we said for maybe a lock-in. One day this may come back around, right? But I look at that and
hopefully
say,
not while I'm in ministry.
I know. But I tend to look at those and say, hey, I don't think that that's beneficial because of these reasons. I don't look at that and go, oh, no, because leaders can't do that. But when you look at something like a student camp or like something that clearly has benefits and you go, I can't do it because everybody's suing everybody. And I know that that's objectively not true because I've been all over the country and I'm about to go preach a D now for you two crazy guys. And you guys do that. And we got leaders in homes and people doing that. And I've never in almost 20 years of doing student camps and D-Nows in my own ministries ever had a hint of problem with leaders. I know that that's a training and development problem, right? And so the problem is that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater because you're not diagnosing a problem. You're just throwing it all away because you are not doing the work of development. And so I think that does get to it, John. You're right. Low in general, we treat leaders like the 90s and the 2000s, which used to be put a pastor or a person in the middle of the circle, line up a bunch of leaders around them, and just push them to a personality.
Yep.
But that's not what ministry ever was supposed to be. And that's
not
what
why
it
you
is
see
now.
churches. It's why you see youth ministries struggle when youth pastors leave and transition. It's why you see churches die. I mean, there's a church that my wife grew up in, and it's a very popular church in the state of Georgia. And the pastor flies from Georgia to California every Sunday to preach at his church in California. It's the weirdest thing.
That is weird.
But she went to church there before we were married. But like that whole church is built around this dude's personality. And so over the years, we've watched as we go visit Kristen's home, we'll go look at what they're doing and how they're developing and building. And I'm like, I just ask her every time, what's going to happen when he dies? What's going to happen when he retires? And it's awful. And so we've got to get away from that mindset where the pastor is the center of everything and the volunteers are there to support people by pushing them to the pastor.
No, absolutely.
The pastor needs to be equipping the saints for the work of ministry.
So when we take our people and we say, when you grab people and say, hey, I need to recruit you for, well, what's the position? Well, one, so there's two sides of that. You're right, John. Sometimes what seems like a small job carries great impact. And we need to be able to say, this isn't a small job. This is a big deal and it takes a lot of weight off. But the other side of it is it's not just that it's low, it's that it's vague. So low and vague responsibilities of just show up. That's that mentality of, well, my leaders don't really know what they do. I just need them to stand around. People that's an anemic style of leadership. And that's not development. That ends up your leaders die of attrition. And they come and they go, I don't really know why I'm here. It's just crazy. And it creates a sense of low value and minimal impact. And so, and this is kind of where we want them to end up. And I think that this is the key. If you guys speak into this, but you want to move your leaders from tasks to responsibilities.
Well, yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think you have to, even in the way you recruit people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to help out in student ministry? What does that mean?
Right.
Or like, hey, one of the things that we really believe here at Rosemont is that we really believe that students need to be invested in spiritually.
Yeah.
And we believe that they need loving adults. Is that something that you think you can do to invest in them spiritually and build relationships with them? And all of a sudden, what you've asked them is not, hey, I need a babysitter. What you've given them is something that has a weight and has a purpose.
You haven't given them a job. You've given them a calling.
That's right.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought you were going somewhere else. I was just adding commentary and then you just stopped.
Yeah.
I've definitely fallen guilty to, the vague task giving of like, hey, I need you here. And then they're just kind of there and it's kind of awkward. And I've fallen prey to that so many times of just saying, okay, well, I need volunteers. So if I just have someone here and then they'll do that, they'll do the thing that they need to do. And then that's it. Instead of showing why it's important, how it grows the ministry, the little things truly emphasize and help the students grow in their relationship and making that important. It's tough to do, but it is necessary in developing your leaders and your volunteers.
I think you have to think of it like one of the things that we see and we talk about all the time when we're talking offline is motivations matter a great deal to the Lord Jesus Christ. And it should matter a whole lot to us too. I mean, it matters in our relationships with our spouses. It matters in our relationships with our friends, right? Like Joshua, you were saying before we got on that like your wife texted you and said, hey, when you get home tonight, dinner's going to be ready. Like part of the reason that was such a big deal to you is because your wife is excited for you to be home and it has been like, she's preparing for you to come home and she's longing for you to come home. The motivation matters compared to when you get home and she's like, oh, hey, here, eat, like it matters. And so we think about that in terms of like the widow's mite and the man who can donate or the man or woman who can donate $1 million. God is not looking for the huge things. Yeah, he'll use them, but what he's looking for is the motivation behind the gift. And we've got to be able to do that with our leaders too.
I think one of the first things we talk about too, and as you're talking with your leaders, John, you did it really well. And you do so well at this, but the first thing we talk about in cohorts when we do this is Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. If you haven't read the book, I think you should read it. I really think you should get into cohort, but we won't push that. But as you get into that, even watching his YouTube video is worth doing. It's had millions and millions of views. But he talks about the idea that if you can communicate why you do something, and I'm gonna push, John, I think through no fault of our own, it's just ministry's hard. We get so dogged down. And so how hard stuff is, man, sometimes we get so caught in tasks. We just need people to do some tasks. And it gets really hard to communicate why things are important because sometimes we don't see it. And I love if we could just take to heart, Simon Sinek gives this example in his book of a landscaping company. And he says, if you could, even something as simple as like, because you're like, well, how do I tell somebody how I need them to do the roles every week, and I need them to do roles for me, and it's a task. So how do I tell them to do the task? And I tell them to do it in an encouraging way. Well, this in the what he says, like you can tell them what, how, and why, like that. And it says we do landscaping. We create beautiful manicured lawns that are less expensive than our competitors. Want to hire us? Like that would be an uninspired, don't start with why kind of way. Hey, I need roles done. I need it done. It's you do it this way. That's important. Do you want to hire us? But what if you were to, the same company said, hey, we believe every person deserves a lawn they can be proud of. Your property makes the first impression with your guests. So we visually convey your high standards of quality by creating beautifully manicured lawns. Also, our landscaping services are less expensive than our competitors. Do you want to hire us? And I sat there and think, man, what if you just needed somebody to do role and you said, hey, we think that every student deserves never to fall through the cracks. And they deserve to be taken care of and people to reach out to them. And you know what? I'm afraid that they're going to if we don't have somebody to help collect those roles every week. And I just need one person that could do that for me on Sundays. Do you think you can help me make sure every student is taken care of? Like moments like that are moments where you have just taken the vagueness away. You've taken it from a task to a responsibility. You've given calling where none exists. And so when we do that idea, man, really move it to that point. But I think that gets to the other side of what's keeping you from having your best team. And man, so many pastors are taught this by example. It's discipled into you inadvertently. And it's the idea of trying to do ministry all by yourself. Come here, buddy. Trying to do ministry all by yourself. Sorry, I got a little buddy with us on this one. But this is my son.
Oh, hey, dude.
Hey. But
what you doing, eh?
This is you're on the podcast with us. You say hi. This is my son Elias. You say hi to everybody.
Hey, buddy.
He's in.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Oh, dang. But all that to say, we got a few more minutes here behind the wall, and I think we can are up on the other side of the wall. But man, I see so many guys that struggle to do everything by themselves, right? And we're taught to do that in ministry, right? You shouldn't ask that of other people, and people expect you to do that. How do you get out of doing that? How do you get out of that idea? And you've got to do it. The other side of it is, I think that there is a massive recruitment pitfall. That I think that the problem is you're recruiting for the jobs that you have. You're not over recruiting for the jobs you don't have yet. How do you guys deal with that?
I recruit all the time.
What about when you filled up your jobs, John?
I don't ever stop. I don't ever stop. Like I'm always recruiting. I'm always asking. Number one, because I think one of the greatest jobs for people that we have is people that just come down there and hang out with students and don't actually lead small groups. They're just making sure that there's no kid that's sitting by themselves. They're making sure that there's no kid wandering off into the woods. There's making like all of those things. Like they're making sure of all those things. And because I've got small group leaders that are unbelievable. And they do a great job. But I've got some people that they want to be around students and love students, but they don't have the gift to be able to sit in that room, which they do. They just don't know they do yet. But they're like, you know what? I can cook some food. Hey, you know what? I can take the trash out. Hey, you know what? I can wipe the tables down. Hey, you know what? I can make sure that everything's clean when the kids leave. And so get as many loving adults as you can to be around your students.
You know what breaks my heart? And I don't know, this is not something we had talking about. What breaks my heart, because I remember the face and I remember the name. Her name was Stephanie. There was a woman. Stephanie was mentally had some mental issues. She wasn't quite special needs. She was probably 35 or 40, lived on her own. But I think when I hear you say that, John, the other thing that I think keeps us from, I think we look at volunteers and people. We're going to talk on the other side of the wall about how we develop people. We're going to talk about really practical things. We're going to talk about identifying native genius. We're going to talk about how we develop people. But I think it's worth looking at. We're going to talk about how communication and environment and how that plays into it. But I want to leave us with this. What broke my heart, I had an executive pastor who became a head pastor. He's one of the worst pastors I ever served with, and in some ways one of the best ones because he taught me a lot of things not to do. And all he would say about people when I saw him, when I met people, new people in our church, was his first statement was, man, they got a lot of horsepower. Because the people to him were just things to do. They were just people to do things for. And something that I saw, and I only saw it because I had people who saw things in me, that saw leadership potential in me or saw opportunities for me. And I saw this. But Stephanie was somebody that hung around our church, and church was somewhere where she found value and she found acceptance. Stephanie was not able to do a lot. She just couldn't. Stephanie was not somebody that you would want, not somebody that you'd want her to be a leader, but she couldn't lead. She wasn't able to do complex subjects or do a lot of things. But Stephanie absolutely loved serving in any way she could. And I think one of the things that we often fail to do is that we fail to realize that your volunteers are a ministry in and of themselves. Yeah. And so Stephanie became a great ministry opportunity for us as a ministry, where I paired her with a leader. And man, Stephanie was like 10, 15 years older than me. And she would just show up every Wednesday night, 30 minutes before, and she'd go, Ian, I'm ready to go. And I was like, well, you were like 30 minutes early. And I was like, well, go find Tina or whoever I sent her with. And I said, well, just go find her and let's work. And I would look, and she would clean. She would work the cafe. She would go and help. If there was a kid in distress, and my other people that were floating and working would do it, she was there. And I absolutely loved having her. And I remember, and it broke my heart, that when we got around to camp, she looked at me and she said, I really want to go to camp. And I said, camp's big. Like, I got 500 kids. I got 75 leaders. And then I've got peripheral leaders. I've got auxiliary people like food ministry and all that. And I remember it was a big heartbreak for us. But I remember saying, I said, I can bring it. She goes, I don't have any money to pay, but can I go? I'll work. And I said, I'll pay for you to go to camp. I said, why don't I bring you for food? And what frustrated me so much, and I don't want you to make the same mistake if you're listening to this, but Stephanie said, I want to go and work. And so I went to one of our staff members who I had 6 full-time food people for 500 kids. And I said, I want Stephanie to come be on the food team with you. And I said, she'll do whatever you need her to do. And and the food people looked at me. Lori looked at me and she goes, I don't think so. That's too much of a problem. I said, Lori, there's 6 of you. You've been doing this for 5 years. You could use her. And she went, no, I don't think so. And I said, Lori, this is a ministry for her as much as it is for you. Can you give her a place? And she went, I guess. And the saddest thing was I ended up leaving that church before we went to student camp. And the executive pastor found her and did not let her go to camp. Yeah. And it, to this day, it makes me teary-eyed because I sit there and I think, and I want you to know, if you're looking at this and thinking about your leaders, we look at students and our hearts break sometimes because students don't find a place. But there are also leaders that God has a place for them, and their mental acuity does not determine their place. Giftedness does not always require a place, but there is a moment and there is a place for them to be developed wherever they may be. And so just know, student pastors are not relegated to just students. You are a family pastor, you are a leader of leaders, and you are a student pastor. So that's all we've got.
Let me add this.
Yeah, please.
This is where I dropped the ball and someone called me to the carpet. And so there was this, I was serving at a church in Nashville, Tennessee, and there was a lady at our church that was notoriously hateful. People didn't want to be around her.
Yeah.
Just nobody enjoyed her. She was not kind. She was not a nice person.
A lot like Joshua.
And we had a volunteer carnival thing, whatever it was, where you set things up in the lobby, and every ministry in the church had a booth, and people went and they kind of checked out your needs. And it was a large church. This lady comes to my table and she writes her name down, their contact number, and my job was to follow up. And I went to one of our staff members, her name was Courtney, and I went to her and I said, I got the short straw. Okay. She signed up on mine, and I need to tell her no. I need to know how to tell her no. And she said, what are you talking about? You're supposed to figure out how to say yes to her. That's your job. Your job is not to figure out how to say no to her. It's to figure out how to say yes. And I'll never forget that. I mean, as long as I live in ministry, I'll never forget that there is, if someone is willing to be obedient, my job as the ministry leader is to find a way to make it work. And so if you're hearing this and there's somebody that has asked you repeatedly and you just don't care for their personality, find a way to make it work. Your job's not to say no to them. It's to figure out a way to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Let me tell you what we ended up doing. I had no clue. I went back to Courtney and I said, I appreciate what you told me. It was a good rebuke. I've got honestly no idea. I have no clue how I'm going to plug this woman in. She's mean. Nobody likes her. I don't know what to do. And Courtney said, well, let's take a look at your Wednesday nights. Let's take a look at your Sunday mornings. Let's see if there's opportunities. And so we sat down and we looked at everything. And I said, I don't see it, Courtney. I said, I've tried and I have failed. And she said, no, you haven't. She said, there's a place for her. She said, I want you to consider this. One of the things that we need to do is we need to be able to track the kids that come in the door. Yeah. And make sure. And so what if she was your welcome person and she just made sure kids checked in? And I said, you do realize this is the meanest woman in our church.
She might be the woman that needs to do it.
And she said, John, she told you she's willing to serve. Tell her this is the place, that you have an opportunity and that she is perfect for it if she will just do it.
Yeah.
And so we we got everything prepared. We actually like built a check-in station, put in these iPads, did all the stuff, and stationed her there. And her job was to. And let me tell you, she lasted 2 weeks. And it wasn't because she wasn't good at it. She was great. And I actually asked her to stay.
Yeah.
But she said the technology was so overwhelming for her that she couldn't deal with the technology. But it ended with her feeling loved, heard, seen, and valued.
That's right.
And if I would have said no to her, she would have felt none of those things. She would have just been rejected. And so it was a good example of when I did it poorly, somebody rebuked me, and it ended well. Just thought I'd share that for you on the first part here, and excited for the second half.
Come listen. We've got a link below. Just sign up. It's $27 a month. You've got the money in your budget. You can do it. We're going to talk about how you don't have to be. You don't learn from our mistakes. You don't have to be rebuked. You don't have to deal with that stuff. We're going to tell you how to identify when those moments come, how to get people plugged in and see where you can plug it in, and so much more. Jump into the second half. See us behind the wall. We love you guys.
See ya.